Alcohol has been part of human civilization for thousands of years, with early records showing its presence in ancient cultures. From humble beginnings, it has evolved into a wide array of drinks, each with its own story. In this video, we will focus on several popular liquors that not only enjoy widespread popularity, but also have rich and intriguing histories. Whiskey is a liquor made from fermented grain mash. Different varieties use various grains like barley, corn, rye, and wheat, which may be malted. It's usually aged in wooden casks, often made of charred white oak, but sometimes uncharred casks previously used for aging port, rum, or sherry are used. Whiskey is regulated worldwide, with many classes and types. What unites them all are the fermentation of grains, distillation, and aging in wooden barrels. Distillation might have been practiced by the Babylonians in Mesopotamia in the 2nd millennium BC for perfumes and aromatics, but this is debated and uncertain. The first confirmed chemical distillations were done by the Greeks in Alexandria in the 1st century AD, though these were not for alcohol. The medieval Arabs adopted the Alexandrian Greeks' distillation methods, with Arabic records beginning in the 9th century, but again not for alcohol. This technology then spread to medieval Latins, with the earliest Latin records appearing in the early 12th century. The first records of alcohol distillation are from 13th century Italy, where alcohol was distilled from wine. The practice spread through medieval monasteries, mainly for medicinal purposes, like treating colic and smallpox. Distillation spread to Ireland and Scotland by the 15th century, where it was commonly distilled for medicinal purposes. Initially practiced in monastic settings, distillation later moved to the secular realm through medical practitioners in the Guild of Barber Surgeons. The first mention of whiskey in Ireland appears in the Annals of Clonmacnoise, noting a chieftain's death in 1405 from consuming too much aqua vitae during Christmas. In Scotland, the earliest record of whiskey production is from the Exchequer Rolls of 1495, where malt was sent to Friar John Core to make aquavitae, enough for about 500 bottles. James IV of Scotland, who reigned from 1488 to 1513, was known to enjoy Scotch whiskey. In 1506, Dundee bought a significant amount of whiskey from the Guild of Barber Surgeons, which had a monopoly on production. In its early days, whiskey was not aged and had a raw, harsh taste compared to modern versions. Renaissance-era whiskey was also very potent and undiluted. Over time, whiskey evolved into a much smoother drink. In the early 1600s, as European settlers, including the Irish and Scots, moved to the Americas, they brought their whiskey distillation knowledge with them. During this period, the first licensed whiskey distillery appeared. In 1608, the Old Bushmills Distillery in Northern Ireland became the world's first official whiskey distillery. Meanwhile, whiskey was becoming increasingly popular in the American colonies. Its production and consumption grew rapidly, and during the American Revolution, whiskey was so valued that many distillers used it as currency. Even George Washington was a distiller, producing up to 300,000 barrels of rye whiskey annually at his Mount Vernon plantation. After the Revolutionary War, whiskey continued to be significant in American history and politics. To help pay off war debts, the new American government imposed a whiskey tax. This tax angered many, especially farmers who relied on distilling their unused grains. This unrest led to the Whiskey Rebellion in the late 18th century, where 600 armed men attacked a tax inspector's home to stop tax collection. President George Washington responded by sending a militia of 13,000 to suppress the rebellion in Pennsylvania. Though the rebellion was quashed, the whiskey tax remained a major burden for farmers. This discontent was pivotal in the election of Thomas Jefferson, who repealed the tax shortly after becoming president. It might be surprising, but until 1823, distilling whiskey in Scotland and Ireland was illegal. This led to much of the production happening at night to avoid detection, coining the term moonshine. From 1920 to 1933, the United States enacted prohibition, making the production, sale, and use of alcohol illegal. This devastated the U.S. whiskey market, but there was one notable exception. The government allowed doctor-prescribed medicinal whiskey, which could only be obtained from pharmacies. This exception significantly contributed to the growth of the Walgreens pharmacy chain, which expanded from 20 to 400 stores during these 13 years. Beer is one of the world's oldest alcoholic beverages, the most widely consumed and the third most popular drink after water and tea. It's made by brewing and fermenting starches from cereal grains, usually malted barley, though wheat, corn, rice, and oats can also be used. The fermentation process converts the starch sugars in the wort into ethanol and carbonation. Most modern beer is brewed with hops, which add bitterness, flavor, and act as natural preservatives and stabilizers. Other flavoring agents, such as groot, herbs, or fruits, can also be used instead of hops. In commercial brewing, natural carbonation is often replaced with forced carbonation. Beer and whiskey are made from the same basic ingredients: barley or other grains, water, and yeast. Despite their vastly different tastes, they share this common foundation. However, there are key differences between them. Beer contains hops and is not distilled, whereas whiskey lacks hops and undergoes distillation. Additionally, beer is carbonated, while whiskey is not. Beer is one of the world's oldest prepared alcoholic drinks. The earliest evidence of fermentation comes from 13,000-year-old residues of a beer-like gruel used by the semi-nomadic Natufians for ritual feasting at Raqefet Cave in Israel's Carmel Mountains. Evidence suggests beer was also produced at Göbekli Tepe during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, around 8500 to 5500 BC. The earliest clear chemical proof of barley beer dates back to around 3500 to 3100 BC from Gödentep in the Zagros Mountains of western Iran. Some believe it could date back even further, to around 10,000 BC when cereal farming began. Beer is prominent in the written history of ancient Egypt, and some archaeologists think it played a crucial role in the formation of civilizations. About 5,000 years ago, workers in Uruk, modern-day Iraq, were paid in beer. During the construction of the Great Pyramids in Giza, each worker received a daily ration of 4 to 5 liters of beer, which provided both nutrition and refreshment, essential for their labor. Early Sumerian writings include references to beer, such as the hymn to Ninkasi, a prayer to the goddess of brewing, which also served as a way to remember the beer recipe in a largely illiterate society. The Epic of Gilgamesh features the alewife Si-Duri advising Gilgamesh to enjoy life with beer. The Ebla tablets from 2500 BC discovered in Syria confirm beer production in the city of Ebla. In China around 7000 BC, a fermented drink made from rice and fruit was produced, unlike sake, which uses mold to saccharify the rice. Instead, the rice was likely prepared by chewing or malting. During the Vedic period in ancient India, records show the consumption of a beer-like drink called sura. Greek historian Xenophon noted beer production in Armenia during his travels. Beer brewing made its way from Egypt to Greece, as evidenced by the Greek word for beer, zythos, derived from the Egyptian zytum. However, beer did not gain the same popularity in Greece as it had in Egypt. The Greeks preferred strong wine and viewed beer as a low-class drink consumed by barbarians. The sentiment was similar in Rome, where wine was also favored over beer. The Greek general and writer Xenophon, in Book 4 of his Anabasis, described beer made from barley in great bowls, with barley malt floating on top. Drinkers used reeds to suck the beverage, which, without water, was very strong and had a flavor that needed to be acquired. Xenophon clearly did not enjoy beer, and neither did many of his fellow Greeks. The playwright Sophocles also referred to beer unfavorably, suggesting moderation in its use. The Romans held a similar disdain for beer. The historian Tacitus described the Germans' beer as a horrible brew fermented from barley or wheat, which was a poor substitute for wine. Emperor Julian wrote a poem praising the scent of wine as nectar and disparaging the smell of beer as resembling that of a goat. Despite this disdain, beer was brewed in Rome. Evidence from the tomb of a beer brewer and merchant in Treveris, modern-day Trier, shows that beer was indeed produced. Excavations at the Roman military camp Castra Regina, modern-day Regensburg, on the Danube have uncovered significant beer brewing activity shortly after the camp was established in 179 CE by Marcus Aurelius. Although beer was not as popular as wine among the Celts, this attitude was reinforced by the Romans. Celtic tribes paid substantial sums for wine from Italian merchants, and the Gauls were particularly known for their love of Italian wines. Nonetheless, beer brewing continued to develop. Almost any substance containing sugar can naturally undergo alcoholic fermentation, making it useful for brewing beer. Observing that sweet liquid could be extracted from starchy sources, many cultures likely invented beer independently. The advent of bread and beer increased prosperity, allowing time for technological development and contributing to the rise of civilizations. Beer was spread across Europe by Germanic and Celtic tribes as early as 3000 BC and was primarily brewed domestically. The early European beers, which differed significantly from modern beer, might not be recognizable today. Besides the basic starch source, these early beers often included fruits, honey, various plants, spices, and even narcotic herbs. Notably absent were hops, which were only introduced later. The first mention of hops in Europe was around 822 by a Carolingian abbot and again in 1067 by Abbess Hildegard of Bingen. In 1516, William IV, Duke of Bavaria, adopted the purity law, which is possibly the oldest food quality regulation still in use today. This law dictated that the only ingredients allowed in beer were water, hops, and barley malt. Before the Industrial Revolution, beer was primarily made and sold domestically. However, by the 7th century AD, European monasteries also began producing and selling beer. During the Industrial Revolution, beer production shifted from artisanal to industrial manufacture, rendering domestic production insignificant by the end of the 19th century. The development of hydrometers and thermometers revolutionized brewing by providing brewers with greater control over the brewing process and a better understanding of the results. The origins of wine stretch back beyond written history, and modern archaeology has yet to pinpoint the exact beginnings of grapevine cultivation. It's hypothesized that early humans climbed trees to pick berries, enjoyed their sweet taste, and began collecting them. Over time, natural fermentation in the juice at the bottom of containers would produce low-alcohol wine. This practice likely evolved around 10,000 to 8,000 BC, coinciding with the shift from a nomadic lifestyle to a more sedentary one, which facilitated agriculture and the domestication of wine. The fermentation of Vitis vinifera subsp. Sylvestris, the ancestor of the modern wine grape, became easier with the development of pottery during the later Neolithic period around 11,000 BC. However, the earliest concrete evidence of wine production dates from several millennia later. The earliest archaeological evidence of wine fermentation dates back to around 6000 BC at sites in Georgia. Other ancient sites with evidence of early wine production include Hajj Firuz in Iran, circa 5000 BC, Greece, circa 4500 BC, and Sicily, circa 4000 BC. The earliest known steady wine production was found in Armenia around 4100 BC. Interestingly, the earliest evidence of a fermented drink made from grapes and rice was found in ancient China, dating to around 7000 BC. The Iranian jars from Hajj Firuz contained a form of retsina, using turpentine pine resin to seal and preserve the wine, providing the earliest firm evidence of wine production. The spread of wine production to Greater Iran and Greek Macedonia occurred by about 4500 BC, with notable evidence of crushed grapes found at the Greek site. The Arini I cave in Vayotz Zor, Armenia, dated to around 4100 BC, is recognized as the oldest known winery. This site contained a wine press, fermentation vats, jars, and cups, along with seeds and vines of Vitis vinifera, a grape still used in modern winemaking. The presence of such developed winemaking technology in 4000 BC suggests that the practice likely originated much earlier. The seeds found in Arini cave date back to about 4000 BC, predating the earliest comparable wine remains in Egyptian tombs by 900 years. Persian wine was renowned in ancient times as depicted in the carvings of the audience hall known as Apadana Palace in Persepolis. showing soldiers of subjected nations presenting gifts, including wine, to the Persian king. Domesticated grapes became abundant in the Near East with the onset of the early Bronze Age around 3200 BC. Increasing evidence of winemaking has been found in Sumer and Egypt from the 3rd millennium BC, highlighting the widespread and ancient tradition of wine production in these early civilizations. Archaeologists have found evidence of wine production using native mountain grapes like Vitis thunbergii and Vitis filifolia during the 1st millennium BC. By the time of the Han Dynasty, beer production had largely disappeared in China, supplanted by stronger drinks fermented from millet, rice, and other grains. These fermented beverages, known as huangjiu, are often translated as wine, but they typically have an alcohol about 20%, making them quite different from grape wine. Wine made from grapes reappeared in China when trade with the West resumed under the Tang Dynasty. Initially, grape wine was primarily consumed by the imperial court and did not become widespread until the Song Dynasty, when its consumption spread among the gentry. Marco Polo, in his 14th century accounts, noted that rice wines continued to be the preferred alcoholic beverage in Yuan, China. Wine held a significant place in ancient Egyptian ceremonial life. A flourishing royal winemaking industry emerged in the Nile Delta around 3000 BC, following the introduction of grape cultivation from the Levant. This development was likely a result of trade between Egypt and Canaan during the early Bronze Age, dating back to at least the 27th century BC, marking the beginning of the Old Kingdom period. In ancient times, the Levant region was a pivotal center for winemaking, contributing significantly to the cultural and economic landscapes of the Mediterranean and Near East. Archaeological discoveries of charred grape seeds and occasionally intact berries or raisins at numerous prehistoric and historic sites across Southwest Asia attest to the deep historical roots of winemaking in the Levant. This tradition dates back to at least the Bronze Age and remained a significant industry until the decline of Byzantine rule in the 7th century CE. The Phoenicians, an ancient civilization located along the eastern Mediterranean coast, were among the first to recognize the importance of cultivating and trading wine. Their strategic location allowed them to establish extensive trade networks across the ancient world. The Phoenicians used amphoras for transporting wine, a practice that was widely adopted and facilitated the spread of viticulture. Their influence reached as far as Rome and Greece, contributing to the development of their wine industries. The Phoenicians also established colonies along the Mediterranean coasts, from modern-day Tunisia to Spain, where they introduced viticulture practices. Carthage, one of their colonies, later became a maritime empire known for its raisin wine, passum, which gained popularity in Rome. Wine played a crucial role in ancient Israelite society, serving as both a dietary staple and a key element in cultural and religious practices. It was integral to everyday life and ceremonial rituals, including sacrificial libations. Archaeological remnants of wine production facilities, such as those at ancient Gibeon, and detailed biblical descriptions of vineyards and grape varieties highlight wine's prominence in ancient Israel. The Hebrew Bible contains numerous references to vines and winemaking, emphasizing its importance. Jewish winemaking traditions evolved during the Hellenistic period, incorporating spices, honey, herbs, and other ingredients to produce sweeter, higher alcohol content wines that were often diluted with water before consumption. During late antiquity, under Byzantine control, the Levant emerged as a renowned center for winemaking. Ashkelon and Gaza, two ancient port cities in modern-day Israel and the Gaza Strip, became important trade centers, exporting wine throughout the Byzantine Empire. The writings of the 4th century CE priest Jerome vividly depicted the Holy Land's vineyards, and the 6th century CE poet Corippus praised the region's white, light, and sweet wines. In the Arabian Peninsula, wine was traded by Aramaic merchants, as the climate was unsuitable for vine growing. However, other fermented drinks, including date and honey wines, were produced in the 5th and 6th centuries. Much of modern wine culture can trace its roots back to the ancient Greeks, whose viticulture practices laid the groundwork for contemporary winemaking. The cultivation of the vine predates both the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, indicating a long history of grape growing in the region. Many of the grape varieties grown in modern Greece are exclusive to the area and are either identical or very similar to those cultivated in ancient times. For instance, Retsina, a popular modern Greek wine, is believed to be a continuation of the ancient practice of lining wine jugs with tree resin, which imparts a distinctive flavor to the wine. In ancient Greece, wine had not yet developed into the lucrative cash crop it would eventually become. However, as viticulture gained importance due to economic demand, the consumption and production of wine increased significantly. The Greeks viewed wine production as a means to promote economic growth, leading to its widespread cultivation and exportation throughout the Mediterranean. Greek amphoras, often adorned with stylistic art, have been found across the region, signifying the extensive trade networks established by the Greeks. Some evidence even suggests that the Greeks may have played a role in the introduction of wine to ancient Egypt. The Greeks introduced the Vitis vinifera vine to their numerous colonies, including those in modern-day Italy, Sicily, southern France, and Spain. This introduction significantly influenced the local wine industries, contributing to the rich diversity of grape varieties and winemaking techniques found in these regions today. The Greeks also contributed significantly to the understanding and appreciation of wine through their literature and philosophy. Homer's epics, for example, frequently mention wine, highlighting its importance in Greek society. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle discussed the virtues and vices of wine consumption, emphasizing moderation and the cultural significance of wine. The Romans, who were heavily influenced by Greek culture, further developed and expanded upon these viticultural practices. They adopted and adapted Greek techniques, which they spread throughout their vast empire. The Romans' contribution to winemaking included advancements in vineyard management, the introduction of new grape varieties, and improvements in wine storage and transportation. Roman innovations such as the use of barrels and glass bottles for wine storage are practices that continue to be integral to modern winemaking. The advent of Islam and the subsequent Muslim conquests in the 7th and 8th centuries reshaped the cultural and political landscape of vast territories, including the traditions surrounding alcohol consumption. Despite Islamic law prohibiting alcoholic beverages, the production and consumption of alcohol, especially wine, continued to thrive under Muslim rule. Wine became a frequent subject of poetry, and many caliphs were known to partake in drinking during social and private gatherings. In the medieval Middle East, advances in distillation by Muslim alchemists led to the production of relatively pure ethanol. This development had industrial applications, particularly in the perfume industry, where ethanol was used as a feedstock. Additionally, wine was distilled into brandy for the first time during this period, marking a significant evolution in the production and use of alcoholic beverages. Despite these advancements and the continued production of wine, the Muslim conquest of the Levant had a significant impact on regional winemaking traditions. The initial suppression of winemaking was followed by the 13th century Mamluk conquest, which resulted in the complete prohibition of wine production. This marked the end of centuries of regional prominence for Levantine wine. In medieval Europe, the landscape of alcoholic beverages was defined by regional differences and social hierarchies. In the southern regions of Europe, where the climate favored grape cultivation, wine became the staple drink across all social classes. This included not just the nobility and the affluent, but also the common people, who had easier access to vineyards. In contrast, the northern and eastern parts of Europe, less conducive to viticulture, relied predominantly on beer and ale. Wine did make its way to these regions, but its cost limited its consumption primarily to the upper classes. In the medieval household, particularly among the merchant class and nobility, wine was a fixture at every meal. A housewife or a servant would offer a variety of wines, both red and white, and often employ recipes for meads and flavored wines. To address the problem of wines spoiling due to the lack of modern preservation methods, people often added honey or spices to mask any undesirable flavors. Since wines were stored in barrels, they were typically consumed young and not aged extensively. This practice of consuming fresh wine led to a common tradition of diluting wine with water, often at a ratio of 4 or 5 parts water to 1 part wine, to reduce the intoxicating effects of alcohol. The history of wine production in the Americas is deeply intertwined with European colonization, starting with the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. One of their primary motivations was to ensure the availability of wine for the Catholic Holy Eucharist, an essential part of religious practice. To this end, the Spaniards brought European grape varieties to what is now Mexico. As waves of European immigrants continued to arrive, they brought with them grape varieties from their homelands, including French, Italian, and German vines. These introductions expanded the diversity of wine production in Mexico, blending Old World traditions with the New World's unique conditions. Despite this influx of European varieties, wines made from Native American grapes, which offer distinct and different flavors, also found a place in the burgeoning wine culture of the Americas. By the 16th century, Mexico had become a significant wine producer, to the point where its production started to rival and affect the commercial output of Spain. This burgeoning industry caught the attention of the Spanish crown, concerned about the competition. In response, the Spanish king issued an executive order to halt Mexico's wine production and the planting of new vineyards. This decree was intended to protect Spain's domestic wine industry from the growing threat posed by its colony's successful vineyards. However, the story of New World wine did not end with this royal edict. The resilience of Native American vines would later play a crucial role in the survival of European viticulture. In the late 19th century, Europe faced a devastating crisis with the outbreak of the phylloxera blight. This tiny insect wreaked havoc on European vineyards, threatening the very foundation of the continent's wine production. It was discovered that Native American grapevines were immune to the pest, providing a potential solution to the crisis. The development of French-American hybrid grapes was one response to the phylloxera blight. These hybrids saw some use in Europe, but a more significant and lasting solution was the practice of grafting European grapevines onto American rootstocks. This method proved highly effective in protecting vineyards from phylloxera and has since become a standard practice in viticulture worldwide. Wherever phylloxera is present, European grapevines are typically grafted onto resilient American rootstocks, ensuring the continued production of high-quality wine. Rum is a liquor made by fermenting and then distilling sugarcane molasses or sugarcane juice. The resulting clear liquid is often aged in oak barrels. Rum originated in the Caribbean in the 17th century. However, a similar drink called brum has been made by the Malay people for thousands of years. Marco Polo noted a very good wine of sugarcane in 14th century Iran. Maria Dembinska mentions that King Peter of Cyprus brought rum to the Congress of Krakow in 1364 as a gift for other royals, which is likely since Cyprus was a major sugar producer in the Middle Ages. This early version of rum, mixed with an almond milk drink called sumada, might not have been like modern rums. Rum production in Brazil dates back to the 1520s. Sanskrit texts also mention shidhu, a drink made by fermenting sugarcane juice. Many historians now believe that rum making reached the Caribbean islands, along with sugarcane and its cultivation methods from Brazil. The common history of modern rum suggests it was invented in the Caribbean in the 17th century by slaves on sugarcane plantations. They found that molasses, a byproduct of sugar refining, could be fermented into alcohol and then distilled. The earliest record of this is a 1651 document from Barbados, specifically mentioning the island of Nevis. By the late 17th century, rum had replaced French brandy as the preferred trade alcohol in the triangle trade. Canoemen and guards on the African side of the trade, who were previously paid in brandy, were now paid in rum. After rum was developed in the Caribbean, its popularity spread to colonial North America. To meet the growing demand, the first rum distillery in the 13 colonies was established on Staten Island in 1664. Boston, Massachusetts, followed with a distillery 3 years later. Rum production soon became colonial New England's largest and most prosperous industry. Due to their technical skills, metalworking, cooperage expertise, and abundant lumber, New England produced a lighter rum more similar to whiskey. Much of this rum was exported, with distillers in Newport, Rhode Island, even creating an extra strong rum to be used as currency in the slave trade. At one point, Rhode Island rum was accepted as currency in Europe alongside gold. Despite New England's success in producing consistent and affordable rum, the best rums were still considered to come from the Caribbean. Before the American Revolutionary War, rum consumption in the colonies was high, with each person consuming an average of 14 liters annually. In the 18th century, the demand for sugar, molasses, rum, and slaves intensified the triangular trade. France banned rum production in its New World colonies to protect its domestic brandy industry, allowing New England distillers to undercut British West Indies producers by purchasing cheaper molasses from French plantations. This led to the Molasses Act of 1733, imposing a heavy tax on molasses imported into the 13 colonies from foreign countries. Compliance and enforcement were minimal, as the tax threatened to put New England distilleries out of business. The strict enforcement of the Molasses Act's successor, the Sugar Act, in 1764, may have contributed to the American Revolution. In the slave trade, rum was often used as a medium of exchange. For example, the enslaved man Venture Smith was purchased in Africa for 4 gallons of rum and a piece of calico. Rum remained popular after the American Revolution. George Washington even insisted on a barrel of Barbados rum for his 1789 inauguration. Rum also played a role in politics, with candidates trying to win votes by generously distributing rum and drinking with the people to show their independence and Republican values. Eventually, restrictions on sugar imports from the British West Indies and the rise of American whiskeys led to a decline in rum's popularity in North America. Rum's link to piracy began with English privateers who traded in the valuable commodity. Many privateers turned to piracy and buccaneering, bringing their love of rum with them. This connection was further popularized by literary works like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. The Royal Navy's association with rum started in 1655 after they captured Jamaica. With access to locally produced rum, the British switched the daily liquor ration for seamen from French brandy to rum. Initially, the rum was given neat or mixed with lime juice. However, around 1740, Admiral Edward Vernon began watering down the rum to reduce its intoxicating effects, creating a mixture called grog. The Royal Navy continued the tradition of giving sailors a daily rum ration, known as a tot, until it was abolished on July 31, 1970. Rum became a key trade item in the early days of the colony of New South Wales due to the lack of coinage and its ability to help settlers forget the harsh conditions. The value of rum was so high that convict settlers were often persuaded to work for the New South Wales Corps officers in exchange for it. The colony developed a reputation for drunkenness, although alcohol consumption was actually lower than in England at the time. The penal colony, established in 1788, faced severe food shortages due to poor crop growing conditions and a lack of livestock. It was eventually deemed cheaper for India rather than Britain to supply Sydney. By 1817, 2/3 of the ships leaving Sydney headed to Java or India, and cargoes from Bengal sustained the colony. Casks of Bengal rum, known for being stronger and less sweet than Jamaican rum, were smuggled ashore by the Royal Marines, despite orders from the governors to search every docking ship. British merchants in India profited from sending ships to Sydney loaded with rice and low-quality spirits. Rum played a central role in the only military coup in Australian history, the Rum Rebellion. When Governor William Bligh tried to curb drunkenness by banning rum as a medium of exchange, the New South Wales Corps reacted. In 1808, they marched to Government House, arrested Bligh, and controlled the colony until Governor Lachlan Macquarie arrived in 1810. Vodka is a clear distilled alcoholic beverage that originated in Poland, Russia, and Sweden. It mainly consists of water and ethanol, sometimes with traces of impurities and flavorings. Traditionally, vodka is made by distilling liquid from fermented cereal grains and potatoes, the latter being introduced in Europe in the 18th century. Some modern brands use corn, sugarcane, fruits, honey, and maple sap as the base. The origins of vodka are debated among scholars due to limited historical records. For many centuries, vodka differed significantly from today's version in flavor, color, and smell, and it was originally used as medicine with an alcohol content of about 14%. Distillation techniques were developed in Roman Egypt by the 3rd century. However, the description of aqua ardens, burning water, or alcohol, from distilling wine with salt appears in Latin works only by the 12th century. By about 1300, the process was well known among European medieval chemists. The world's first written mention of the word vodka dates back to 1405 in the Acta Grodzki, a recorder of deeds in the Palatinate of Sandomierz in Poland. At that time, vodka referred to chemical compounds like medicines and cosmetic cleansers. The production of liquor began in the mid-15th century, with various local traditions emerging across Europe. In Poland, it became known as vodka. In the 16th century, the Polish term for the beverage was gorzałka, from the Old Polish verb gorzeć, meaning to burn, which is also the source of the Ukrainian word horilka. The word written in Cyrillic first appeared in 1533, referring to a medicinal drink brought from Poland to Russia by Russian merchants. A type of distilled liquor called vodka arrived in Russia in the late 14th century. In 1386, Genoese ambassadors brought the first aqua vita, water of life, to Moscow and presented it to Dmitry Donskoy, the Grand Prince. This liquid, obtained by distilling grape must, was seen as the concentrated essence or spirit of wine, which is reflected in its name across many European languages. Until the mid-18th century, vodka had a relatively low alcohol content. The first official Russian document using the word vodka in its modern sense dates back to a decree by Empress Elizabeth on June 8, 1751, which regulated the ownership of vodka distilleries. By the 1860s, government policies promoting state-manufactured vodka made it the preferred drink for many Russians. Taxes on vodka became a crucial part of government finances in Tsarist Russia, sometimes providing up to 40% of state revenue. Poland is renowned for its potato vodka, a tradition that started in the early 19th century with a royal exchange. The Austrian emperor gifted potatoes, an exotic item from the Americas, to the Polish king. Later in the century, new technologies allowed for the production of more refined vodkas. By 1871, rectification techniques close to today's standards were implemented, enhancing the quality and purity of Polish vodka. Tequila is a distilled beverage made from the blue agave plant, primarily in the area around the city of Tequila, 65 kilometers northwest of Guadalajara, and in the Jaliscan highlands of the central western Mexican state of Jalisco. The red volcanic soils in the Tequila region are ideal for growing blue agave, and over 300 million plants are harvested there each year. The agave grows differently depending on the region. Blue agaves in the highlands, Los Altos, are larger and sweeter, while those in the valley have a more herbaceous flavor and fragrance. Due to its historical and cultural significance, the region near Tequila was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2006. Tequila's origins are quite different from the modern drink we know today. The Aztecs cherished a fermented drink called pulque, made from the sap of the agave plant. This technique was likely used even earlier by the Olmecs, a civilization dating back to 1000 BC in the lowlands of Mexico. Pulque was so integral to Aztec culture that they worshipped two gods associated with the beverage, Mayahuel, the goddess of the maguey, and her husband Patacatl, the god of pulque. Although the first documentation of pulque appeared around 200 AD, the drink gained significant popularity centuries later, especially after the Aztecs encountered the Spanish. Don Pedro Sanchez de Tagle is considered the first person to produce tequila. In 1595, King Philip II of Spain banned the planting of new vineyards in Mexico and other Spanish colonies due to the decline of wine trade with Spain. This was because Mexico was self-sufficient in producing its own wines. The king wanted to maintain the market for Spanish products in the New World and reap the taxes on wine exports. The Marquis of Altamira, Don Pedro Sanchez de Tagle, seized the opportunity presented by the neglected blue agave plants. He built his first tequila factory in his Hacienda Cuisillos, one of the largest haciendas at that time, and amassed a great fortune. Today, the Marquis is known as the father of tequila. Spain's King Carlos IV granted the Cuervo family the first legal license to commercially make tequila. Don Zenobio Sousa, founder of Sousa Tequila and municipal president of the village of Tequila from 1884 to 1885, was the first to export tequila to the United States. He also shortened the name from tequila extract to just tequila for the American markets. Gin is a distilled alcoholic drink flavored with juniper berries and other botanicals. The earliest known written reference to Genever appears in the 13th century encyclopedic work Der Naturenblume from Bruges, with the first printed recipe for Genever dating back to the 16th century book Een Kostelijk Distilleerboek from Antwerp. Monks used it to distill sharp, fiery, alcoholic tonics, including one made from wine infused with juniper berries. They were making medicines, hence the use of juniper. As a medicinal herb, juniper had been an essential part of doctors' kits for centuries. The Romans burned juniper branches for purification, and plague doctors stuffed the beaks of their plague masks with juniper to supposedly protect them from the Black Death. Across Europe, apothecaries handed out juniper tonic wines for coughs, colds, pains, strains, ruptures, and cramps. These tonic wines were a popular cure-all, though some thought they were a little too popular, consumed more for enjoyment than medicinal purposes. The physician Franciscus Sylvius is often incorrectly credited with inventing gin in the mid-17th century. Evidence shows Genever's existence earlier, as referenced in Philip Massinger's play, The Duke of Milan, from 1623, when Sylvius would have been about 9 years old. It's also said that English soldiers drank Genever for its calming effects before battle during the 80 Years' War in 1585, which is where the term Dutch courage supposedly originated. By the mid-17th century, numerous small Dutch and Flemish distillers had popularized redistilling malted barley spirit, or malt wine, with juniper and other botanicals like anise, caraway, and coriander. These spirits were sold in pharmacies to treat ailments such as kidney issues, lumbago, stomach problems, gallstones, and gout. Gin appeared in various forms in England by the early 17th century and enjoyed a resurgence during the Stuart Restoration. Gin's popularity surged as an alternative to brandy when William III and Mary II became co-sovereigns of England, Scotland, and Ireland after the Glorious Revolution. This gin was often crude and inferior, sometimes flavored with turpentine. Historian Angela McShane described it as a Protestant drink, its rise supported by a Protestant king and used to fuel armies fighting the Catholic Irish and French. Gin's meteoric rise in England can be attributed to a significant policy change by the government that allowed unlicensed gin production while imposing a heavy duty on imported spirits like French brandy. This created a large market for poor-quality barley that was unfit for brewing beer. Between 1695 and 1735, thousands of gin shops emerged throughout England, a period famously known as the Gin Craze. Gin's affordability made it particularly popular among the poor. At the time, the low price of gin compared to other available drinks made it a staple for many in dire financial situations. London alone boasted around 15,000 drinking establishments, more than half of which were gin shops. Beer maintained a relatively good reputation because it was often safer to drink than the untreated water, which was frequently contaminated. However, gin was blamed for various social problems, including contributing to higher death rates, which played a role in stabilizing London's previously growing population. In response to the societal issues caused by widespread gin consumption, the government enacted the Gin Act of 1736. This law imposed high taxes on gin retailers, which led to public riots and resistance. The prohibitive duty was gradually reduced and finally abolished in 1742. A more effective legislative measure came with the Gin Act of 1751, which required distillers to sell only to licensed retailers and brought gin shops under the jurisdiction of local magistrates. This act marked a turning point, as it effectively curbed the rampant and unregulated sale of gin, bringing some measure of order to what had been a chaotic and problematic industry. Baiju is a clear Chinese liquor, usually containing between 35% and 60% alcohol by volume. Each variety of Baiju uses a unique type of ku for fermentation, creating distinct flavors. Typically distilled from fermented sorghum, Baiju can also be made from other grains. Some styles in southeastern China use rice and glutinous rice, while other varieties might include wheat, barley, millet, or Job's tears in their mash. Alcohol has deeply influenced Chinese culture for thousands of years. The Chinese have been drinking alcohol longer than recorded history can tell. In Jiahu, Henan province, people brewed a drink from rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn fruit 9,000 years ago, making it the world's oldest known alcoholic beverage. As Chinese civilization developed, wine became highly valued, bridging worlds and people. Ancient kings had court brewers craft drinks to cement friendships and win over enemies. Among these drinks, a grain alcohol fermented from naturally harvested yeast called ju became particularly popular. As Chinese kingdoms united into a vast empire, Huangju sweet grain wine became the dominant drink. During the Han Tang and Song dynasties, Huangju inspired painters and poets alike. Drinking became a secular battlefield, with Confucianists advocating for moderation and Taoists seeking enlightenment through drunkenness. In the 13th century, Genghis Khan's Mongol hordes invaded China, sweeping across Central Asia and descending on the Middle East, where chemists had discovered the secrets of alcohol distillation. The conquerors soon spread distilled spirits throughout the Mongol Khanate. The earliest spirits in China were likely influenced by Middle Eastern arak, but Chinese brewers quickly adapted. They refined their methods, using thousands of years of folk knowledge and the new distillation techniques. They extracted the essence of Huangju, and by the Ming Dynasty, this potent drink became known as shaoju, or burnt wine. Today, we call it Baiju. Baiju spread throughout the empire, adapting to local tastes and traditions and evolving into several unique styles. A class division emerged. The aristocratic elite preferred Huangju, while the peasantry favored the stronger and more affordable Baiju. Brandy is an alcoholic beverage distilled from wine or fermented fruit mash. The term usually refers to the grape product, while brandies from other fruits are named after the specific fruit. Most brandies, except certain white types, are aged. Aging in wooden containers deepens the color to amber, while paraffin-lined casks or earthenware keep it clear. Brandy began to be distilled in France around 1313, initially as a medicine, and was called the water of life, due to its supposed health benefits. In the early 16th century, French brandy played a key role in the cross-Atlantic triangle trade, replacing Portuguese fortified wine due to its higher alcohol content and ease of shipping. On the African side of the trade, canoemen and guards were often paid in brandy. By the late 17th century, rum had replaced brandy as the preferred exchange alcohol in the triangle trade. Initially, wine was distilled to preserve it and make it easier for merchants to transport. It is also believed that wine was distilled to reduce tax, which was assessed by volume, with the intent to add the water removed by distillation back to the brandy before consumption. It was discovered that storing the distilled product in wooden casks improved it over time. The distillation process removed water and led to the formation and decomposition of various aromatic compounds, changing the flavor of the distillate. Non-volatile substances like pigments, sugars, and salts were left behind, resulting in a taste quite different from the original wine. Since most brandies are distilled from grapes, regions producing excellent brandies generally align with grape-growing areas. By the end of the 19th century, Western European markets and their overseas empires were dominated by French and Spanish brandies, while Eastern Europe was known for brandies from the Black Sea region, including Bulgaria, Crimea, Georgia, and Armenia. In 1877, the Ararat brandy brand was established in Yerevan, Armenia, and became highly regarded. During the Yalta Conference, Winston Churchill was so impressed with the Armenian brandy Dvin, given to him by Joseph Stalin, that he requested several cases to be sent annually. with reports indicating 400 bottles were shipped to him each year. Cider is an alcoholic drink made from fermented apple juice. Historically, apples weren't eaten much because they were often too bitter. Instead, for thousands of years, people pressed them for their juice and let it ferment, turning it into hard cider. Like many ancient foods and drinks that became global industries, the Silk Road played a role. This ancient trade route introduced regions to various fruits, vegetables, grains, and spices, including apples. Wild apple forests were found in the Tian Shan mountain range, in what is now Kazakhstan. There is evidence of apple trees growing along the banks of the Nile River dating back to around 1300 BC, but there is no proof that ancient Egyptians made cider from them. However, given their enjoyment of beer and their early brewing culture, they likely had some understanding of the pleasures of fermenting beverages. Once cider gained popularity, it spread rapidly. By 55 BC, when the Romans first sailed to the British Isles, the locals were already drinking a cider-like beverage made from apples, which the Romans quickly grew to love. This fondness helped cider spread throughout the Roman Empire and across Europe, gaining popularity among Germanic tribes and the Normans. The Normans' conquest of England in the 9th century brought apple orchards and the word cider into the English language. From the 16th century onward, a period of global cooling made grape growing difficult, favoring apples, a hardier fruit capable of withstanding cooler temperatures. This shift coincided with England's wars with Spain and France, which disrupted imports of sherry, brandy, and wine. Apples thus became the preferred choice for making alcoholic drinks. As a result, cider became England's go-to beverage alongside ale. Today, England has the highest per capita consumption of cider globally and is home to the world's largest cider producers. Cider's appeal wasn't confined to Europe and the Mediterranean. The earliest colonists brought it to the Americas, where beer was more popular. However, early settlers in New England found it difficult to grow grains and barley for brewing beer. Apples, on the other hand, thrived in the region, making cider an ideal alternative. Colonists quickly embraced cider, which was different from the sweet, dark brown cider found at farmers' markets today. This cider was boozy, making it safer to drink than much of the available water and nutritious enough to sustain them through harsh winters. Despite its early popularity, cider's prominence in America began to decline. German and Eastern European immigrants, who brought a deep love for beer, settled in the Midwest, where growing grains and hops was easier than along the Atlantic coast. The biggest blow to cider came with Prohibition, which wiped out nearly all American cideries for decades.